Jessie Mahoney, welcome to the Lean Out podcast. How are you today?
I am great. Thanks so much for having me. It's going to be fun.
Yes, absolutely. I have been wanting to interview you and talk to you about all things physician wellness and coaching and offering retreats. So, if people are not familiar with you, can you please introduce yourself, what your work life balance is like currently, and how it's different from other people in your chosen profession?
Sure. So I am Dr. Jessie Mahoney, and I am a pediatrician by training. I'll say still a pediatrician, but not practicing clinically right now. I do like to say that because I think many people say, like, oh, you're not a pediatrician anymore, but it informs everything I do. And you're never not one, no matter what you decide to do next. These days, I run a business called Pause and Presence, and I do coaching and retreats. And it's essentially physician slash sometimes clinician wellness, depending on who I am working with or for. And I mostly do things for individuals, anybody who wants to join me from anywhere across the country or Canada, sometimes even farther afield. And I still actually circle back and work with institutions, which is a lot of what I used to do as a physician wellness leader. And so these days, my work life balance is actually kind of fun. I will say it's always still a balance in the sense that even when I now don't have a clinic to get to, I don't have a patient every 15 minutes, I'm not on a big regional leadership team that needs to perform something or get it done by a certain deadline. But our tendencies to work a lot and not to be busy so much. Like I just find I'm one of those multi-passionate, engaged people who loves to do stuff. And so I can still, the day will pass and I'm exhausted at the end and I worked all day, even though I worked for myself. So it's that sort of constant reminder. So, but I just try to take the time when I feel like I need it to the best of my ability, given other obligations and things that I do. And I think that for me is really recognizing it and taking it when you need it. It's been a struggle to learn. I notice sometimes like I just am distracted and I'm tired. And that's really when I should be taking a break. And it might not look like the 9 to 5 schedule. In fact, many people are like, oh, you have all your weekends off. I actually work a lot on the weekends, but I might
Me
take a
too.
Monday off. Or I might go for a hike in the middle of the day and then work till 7. And so I think it's that ability to kind of listen to yourself, which you don't have in other settings. Although I will say we actually do have that ability. We just turn it off and we try to accommodate. And so we can do it in the micro moments. And even when I was still working as a pediatrician, that was really how I navigated it was 5 minutes outside or 5 minutes of breathing in the middle of a day, for example. And that those things make a huge difference if we allow ourselves to do them.
Absolutely. And you struck out on your own and started your own business a few years ago. And I remember starting to follow you when you were still doing all of the things. I have two questions. Originally, what got you interested in doing wellness work as a clinician? How did you get involved with that? And then how did you transition away to doing your own business?
So I originally got into wellness work actually an extremely long time ago. So when I was first year in my practice and I worked for the Permanente Medical Group or Kaiser as other people know the name of it. And grew up in Berkeley. So I'm someone who speaks up and I just began speaking up at the very beginning. Part of the incentive to speak up was that I had a baby in med school and I had a baby in residency. So when I started my practice, I had um, like a 5-year-old and a 1-year-old or something like that. And so it was so apparent that you couldn't not be a human and you couldn't not have human needs because there were other humans depending on you. I think we're willing to sacrifice ourselves, but we can't sacrifice small children. And I'm a pediatrician, so people in pediatrics should understand that children need care and children get sick. And yet our systems didn't allow for that. And so I just began speaking up actually as a med student, but as a student, nobody listens to you. So when I started in my practice, literally, I became the chief of physician wellness, which wasn't a job. But they were like, yes, this does seem like an issue. We're, asking people to do things that are not sustainable for the long term. And at TPMG, most people stay their entire career. So they did understand that we had to create something that was sustainable for people for an entire career. But within a big organization, even one that's forward thinking, because that was probably in 2003, um, it's hard to make big changes. It's like moving a tanker ship or a container ship. And so while I did that work for 18 years as part of my leadership role, I got to a point where I was tired and tired of navigating a container ship, which is not really my style. And so, probably about 10 years ago now, I left my employed job 5 years ago. But 10 years ago, I just started to really research things outside of my day to day life. And I worked with a coach. I did some coach training. I did yoga and mindfulness training. I started digging into all of these things that were outside of the usual wellness box. And there came a point where I just realized that this was something that I felt like I had to do, that I had at this point all these answers, solutions to the problem, which is where a doctor brain goes, and I couldn't implement them in a nimble enough way. I wouldn't say that like the organization's like, you can't do this. It's just that you could do it as a tiny pilot project, or you could try this or try that. And I just had this vision of something so much bigger. And I decided that I really sort of couldn't not do it, as the case may be. Not to say it wasn't terrifying and not to say I knew it would work. I didn't. I just got to this point where I was like, wow. I often ask this question with people I coach, but like, what would your future want you to do? And in my organization, you pretty much stay till you're 60 because there's a lot of things that happen when you're 60. And so I said, well, what will my 6-year-old self wish I had done? I was 50 at the time for the next 10 years. And it was so clear to me that I really had something else to contribute to the world. That I wasn't, I didn't leave because my job was terrible or I was burnt out. I actually left sort of in search of something else or to do something else. And I think that's really important. Most of us leave to get away from something we don't like, and then we don't find what we do like. Doesn't mean you have to know what it is, but you have to have some sort of GPS of something you're moving towards, because otherwise you just end up with something else you don't like. And I will say that I might have learned that because I was a leadership junkie, maybe I'll call it. But, I was the wellness leader. I was chief of the department. I did, patient advocacy. Like I did all of this stuff, always looking for the thing. And I moved my practice from one location to the other, thinking it would be better there. I did hospital work. Like I kept trying things. And so I was always like, it'll be better there. And what I think you really need to understand is, well, what are you looking for? And what is you and what makes you come alive? And that's really where I just decided that I couldn't not make a change.
Yeah. I mean, what you're saying applies to so many things. I've seen people who save a ton of money, try to maximize their income so that they can retire early or be financially independent. And then all of a sudden, it's like, well, what are you retiring to? What are you transitioning to? Because we all want to have some sort of purpose and meaning in our lives and something that we're working on. I mean, I think that we all are like that, especially people who go into medicine, because we already are people who want to contribute and want to help. It's fair to be looking at different ways that you can tweak the system that you're in, like you said. And then once you exhaust that, then it's like, I need a different system.
I like to say, I think you really want to play your hand fully. That's what I say. Like, I really felt like I did. And I couldn't, at that point, I couldn't say like, oh, I should have tried that or I should have tried this. Because I do think, medicine, for most of us, we went into medicine because we love it. I also think it's helpful to leave when you could do what you're doing more, and it's fine, but you really want to do something else. And I think for most people in medicine, if we do the work, we can get to that point. And maybe we find that, I think for people in OB, maybe they only want to do OB hospitalist, or maybe they only want to do clinic, or maybe they only want to be a surgeon, or maybe they want to actually go back to doing all the things in a small community. Like figuring out what it is that makes you excited and makes you come alive and getting out of a toxic situation. I was not in a toxic situation, but I think many people are, in which case you don't want to stay to figure it out. You actually need to get out to figure it out. So there isn't a right path. I think in medicine, we think there's a right path. But I do think it's really important to not run away. And I see so many people who are like, I'm going to, save all this money and retire early. But then it's like, well, then what next? Because we're really just goal focused, right? Goal focused to get to medicine. Now I have to get out of medicine. So you really want to figure out, well, who are you and what makes you come alive really in life?
I feel that, and I know you would agree that coaching is so helpful in this space because you have different blind spots about your options. And it's so helpful to talk to someone who doesn't really know you as a friend or, in that kind of a professional capacity, even. And that can help you to navigate all of the different options there. And like what you said, like, am I leaving because I'm giving up too soon or, can I tweak this? Can I tweak that? Or is it a toxic situation and I really should get out? I mean, it's very hard to assess all of that stuff.
Absolutely. From within, it's impossible, I would say. And
Mm.
I, had worked with a coach many years before I made my change. And I had done coach training, which is more coaching and more coaching, and I still work with a coach because I think that, in medicine, the lesson is that getting help is sort of a weakness, but I would say it's a strength. Like if you want to show up and really enjoy your life and really make I don't love the idea of the biggest contribution, but contribute in a way that's most meaningful to you and feel like you played your hand in life. Coaches help, and so many other professions understand that. We just don't in medicine.
Yeah, well, it's definitely getting to be more well known,
Yeah.
I would say. There are still a lot of skeptics out there, as you and I have both seen, but it's definitely catching on. And in your practice of coaching, you have a lot of different offerings. You have one on one and you have group offerings that are specially themed. And then you have a podcast that's all about mindfulness. You have yoga that you offer to people every week. I mean, you're doing all of the things and I love it. It's kind of a model for me, actually. I mean, I would love to start doing the videos. But the other thing that I wanted to ask you about is this new endeavor that you have, which is that you bought a property with your
Mhm.
husband and you're offering retreats on your own property now, which I know you had started offering some retreats where you would rent out a property. So, talk a little bit about this new adventure.
Yeah, and I'll say still new, so we're still figuring it out. I think, but it sort of just happened is what I like to say. I think people are like, "Oh, how did you, like, plan that out and make it happen?" And, I will say I sort of fell into doing the retreats initially. I used to do a lot of retreats for my employer, and, my dad actually, when I was growing up, did study abroad programs, and they're like retreats. They're the 1970s, 80s version of a retreat. And so I really did kind of understand how to do them. So in retrospect, I'm like, oh, it makes perfect sense. But I found this beautiful spot that just worked in 2021. And so I did a lot of retreats there. And what happened is my youngest actually was uh, graduated from high school and left for college. And I had been doing all of these retreats and spending literally 2 to 3 months a year at this other property leading retreats. And so, 1 week at a time, but it was spaced out and we were looking to get out of the city and I was no longer working in the city, so I didn't need to be there. I had lived there for 30 years and I was really itching to be more in nature. And I had been looking for a place to move, but then a few spots kind of, I was like, huh, maybe I could do all of this in the same place. And a lot of what we do in retreats, aside from the coaching, is sort of farm to table and culinary medicine. And so being able to have a farm, and I'll put that in quotes, um, is a really beautiful way to sort of lean into it. And so I literally ended up seeing this spot that I just loved. And I was like, apparently this is what we're gonna do. And and then we just sort of are trying to figure out how to do it. I mean, and it's working. I think that once you just sort of set your mind that like this is a thing, and I know it's a really beautiful way to work with people because many people do need to get out of their own environment and to have them be in a place in my mind that's not a spa, that's not a hotel, that's not in a big city. It has very different energy. And what I offer is tiny groups. And so if you think about it from that perspective, it's just something that we don't have that opportunity to get together with, 5 other women physicians or 6, including me, and really do this intensive work in a space where you can rest and be in nature and practice yoga and eat, food that nourishes you. And so it just felt like this opportunity to make it happen. And I'll say we are just constantly solving problems, but I think doctors know how to solve problems. This is what I like to say, like all of those years of figuring out how to have children in medical school and residency and all, like if you can figure that out, you can figure out the next thing too.
Yeah, very good point. I like to remind people all the time, my clients
Yeah.
and the people that listen to the things that I say, that you can do hard things. You've already done hard things. We've all done them, or you wouldn't be where you are today.
Right. And I think we just have this closed mindset. So many people are like, well, tell me how to do it. And I'm like, you'll know how after you do it. It's just uncomfortable for us. We're used to the prescribed to go to med school, do residency, do a fellowship, work here. And so when you're sort of stepping off onto a different path, there isn't a prescribed path. And yet that's where the opportunity, I think, to make change in the world is right now, because the prescribed path of medicine is struggling right now. And so I think that we can start to get creative and bring to the world really helpful things. And if anybody can do that, doctors can.
Right. And did your husband also retire from law
He did.
recently?
He did. And that story is somewhat amusing in that those retreats that I mentioned, my husband, the very first one was during COVID. And so while I found this beautiful location, you couldn't hire anybody to make food. And my husband's actually an incredible chef, cook. And he many, many years ago, before we got married, actually, my dad hired him to go to Ireland and cook for one of his retreats when he was 21 or 22. And so I knew he could do it. And I knew that he also, if he could cook for 3 teenage boys, he can cook for anybody. Um, but he comes from a family of cooks, and he had worked in a lot of fancy restaurants before he went to law school. So he loves art and food and all of this stuff. So I convinced him to cook for the first retreat when I couldn't hire anybody. And there was no catering in any retreat centers because it was still during COVID. And then the folks who came were like, you need to keep him. And so what ended up happening is it was about, I don't know, 13 retreats later that he was like, this isn't really feasible. He would do breakfast and then go practice law and then like work on the meals and like do things all he was doing it all at the same time.
Wow.
And uh he was also done being a lawyer at that time. He was kind of a trial litigation lawyer, which is not his spirit at all. He's a really kind, not argumentative person. Um, and so there were things about it he loved, but he felt very complete with that. And he was helping me a lot. As you know, there's a lot in running a business that you actually need a lawyer for. So he was doing a lot of work, and he was like, I said at that point, I really need to hire someone. Like, I need some help. And he's like, you could hire me. And I kind of thought that was crazy, but he kept bringing it up and I kept thinking about it. And I was like, well, why wouldn't I? Like, I trust him, and he's already doing tons of things for me pro bono. But so he did about, almost 2 years ago, leave his, attorney job to work with me full time. And it's been a journey, but we're figuring it out. And I think that it's been um, learning a lot about ourselves and our relationship. And what I'll really say is how fun if you can work with this person who's your spouse and hopefully a good friend. And that I think also really adds a lot to what I offer, because people can really sort of see like how you can change your whole life around to grow something that's really meaningful. And if you can do it with your spouse, all the better. I know that's not always the case, but um, for me, I also feel this gift of not only has this been a great experience for me and all the people that I work with, but also for him. Um, and I will say also for my kids, I like to offer that they actually said for a long time before I was brave enough to make a change that they were like, "You keep talking about doing this, but we notice you're not doing it." And I was like, "Oh, I'm not ready." And they were like, "Well, when are you gonna be ready?" And so
In pure coaching spirit.
I know. When I made the change, I was like, "I'll just borrow." Like, they were certain I could do it. I was the one that wasn't certain, and my husband was certain, but I was the one that wasn't certain. But what they say now is like they didn't actually think I would do it. And so they were like, "Wow, watching you do that, like if our 50-year-old mom can do that, anybody, like I can do anything." And I do think that that is really inspiring. And so a big piece of what we do is inspire our children and inspire others and um, even inspire people who maybe used to take care of their families or, I think it's a really beautiful opportunity that we don't think of. Like we think about ourselves and what it's going to do for us, or we think about always what we're going to miss out on, what we're going to lose, the stability of the income, the stability of the, benefits, for example. But we don't think about what we'll gain.
Yeah, you almost answered this, but I was gonna ask you, this is why I asked about Mark,
Yeah.
because, how was it navigating uncertainty, financial or otherwise, with going both of you almost at the same time into this, like, entrepreneurship path?
Yeah. Well, I will say stressful. And I had been at it for 3 years beforehand. So it didn't really feel like the same time because his thought was that he had watched and felt comfortable that it was an okay time to do this. So
Mm.
I think it was actually somewhat calculated. I think many people think like, oh, you must have a trust fund or I'm like, "No, it's really," and in many ways, it's probably worked because I don't. And so I was just like, "I have to make it work, or I'm going to make it work, or I want
Mhm.
to make it work." I also knew early on, early on, you can go back to medicine. I think people always say, like, "Oh, they won't take you back." I had many, many, many an opportunity to go back. Um, and part of me says I also still practice medicine. It's just in a different way. And it's not medicine, it's not exam room medicine, but working with people in medicine. I haven't left that field or that energy. And in many ways, helping other physicians keep practicing is provide allowing others to have medicine that in this day and age they might not have. But I won't say it's not scary. I think many people are like, well, it's, too risky. I'm like, it is risky. You just have to lean into that risk and lean into I think many of us in medicine, we like certainty. We wanna know. We are very risk averse, and, it doesn't there's no guarantees. I'm laughing because I'm thinking about my husband who said recently, like, if this doesn't work or I, drop dead or float away, we have a creek right here and it's been raining a lot. He's like, if I float away in the creek, this will have been worth it. Like, but being able to lean in and do something that is really meaningful to you. So I'm pretty sure that won't happen, but that's really nice to hear. And I think if you can just lean into the like, what will you gain and why will it be worth it? Um, and I think for some people too, we want to get out so we can retire. But I feel like what I'm doing now is something that I can't do it when I'm 70. There's a lot of manual labor on farm, right? So
Mm.
now is kind of our window to be out in nature, um, doing these things. And so I think we don't want to miss out on that. And we've already missed out on so much in medicine. And the other thought I have here is I think for people who are listening, you don't have to go all or none either. So where I worked, I couldn't do this work and keep working there. That was in my contract. So I had to choose. But I didn't actually intend to choose not to continue to practice pediatrics. What happened to me is that COVID happened almost simultaneously, which I was not expecting. And so that changed sort of my options in terms of practicing medicine. But I think for many people, you can embark on your own practice. You're still practicing medicine, or you can do some locums at the same time, or you can do per diem where you worked before because they love you and know you, and um, if that's an option. So for many people, you don't have to just jump out of a plane.
Yeah, this is like what I do. I never stopped practicing
Mm.
anesthesiology. I just went to locum tenens per diem only.
Yeah.
And I continue to do that because it does continue to bring me fulfillment and a reward in a different way than the wellness work does. And could you argue that you're helping more people doing just the wellness work? I don't know. I mean, I'm helping people in a different way. Like you were saying, you're treating patients in one job, and I still want to hang on to that. I still want to do it. And then in the other job, you're helping other physicians to treat more patients. You're helping them to feel more fulfilled and them to have a better sense of wellness or life. And so that means a lot too.
What's popping up here is our natural tendency to have like a hierarchy of worthiness and like this part of your job is more worthy than this part or more meaningful. And yet, what if they're all just part of some beautiful, I would say, tapestry or pie or something like that? And I think you mentioned all the different things I do, and I like to do different things. And so I think y'all are just creating this tapestry, but somehow in medicine, it's like you have this one job and that takes all of your energy, and maybe you have some energy for your family, and that's your life. But if we could think more holistically and try to bring in all of these things, maybe many more people, in fact, I know many more people would be able to continue to practice medicine, which all of us love. Like, we wouldn't have spent all that time doing it if we didn't have a passion for the science and the knowledge and the healing people and working with people.
Yes. And I have heard you say before that the system, it's very geared toward fitting in and being on a prescribed path. And then there's also the push towards specialization. And what you just mentioned is like being a specialist and being the number one person in that particular field. And that is somehow this pinnacle of success that a lot of people see. Whereas it could be more fulfilling you to have multiple things going on. I know I'm like you. I like to have multiple things going on in my life. I like a little bit of chaos. It's enjoyable.
Mhm. I used to, in my old job, in fact, I would often be told I was the chief of multiple things at once. People like, you can't do that. Like, you have to pare it down. And where are you going to spend your energy? And I was like, oh no, I like it like this. And I think that they all inform each other. And so we get
Mm.
to, I think, just honoring your humanity. I think somehow in medicine, someone told us we were all the same, but we're not at all. We're these creative human beings, which we've forgotten about, that have lots of different facets. And when we can get back to honoring that, we can actually, most people can continue to practice medicine and honor these interesting facets. Maybe they're going to write a book on the side, or maybe they're going to do some speaking. And it isn't that you have to do more. Maybe they're just going to grow vegetables and eat them with their family, or maybe they're going to be a grandma. It doesn't matter. But I think we have this idea that there's a linear path, and it serves the system well, but it doesn't serve us well. And I might add, I don't think it's serving the system well anymore. And so things have to shift.
Well, Jesse, would you have any particular advice to give to women or other physicians, other professionals who are listening who are feeling overwhelmed and like they're stuck on the treadmill of achievement, stuck in that specialization path and in that linear, one model type of thinking?
Yeah, well, I'm thinking because your podcast is called Lean Out. You could lean out, or my version of that would be like pause, pause and pause and breathe, or pause and be present. In the idea that we often think that we have to have the answer while we're in that overwhelm, but the overwhelm itself is blocking your ability to figure out who you are and what you want. And in medicine, we were taught not to listen to ourselves, so we can't in that environment listen. And so that whether it's leaning out, taking a break, taking a pause, and I don't think it even has to be a huge, sabbatical. It can be a few days or it can be working less, but finding space in there, the pause so that you can actually move forward intentionally. I think we're just on that hamster wheel reactivity. And so it's that pause so that you can in the space respond rather than react, because we are just caught up in not just the speed of the system, but old thought patterns and old ways of doing things that are actually keeping us stuck. And so until we see those, we can't change and we will continue to feel stuck. And I think you can't see them if you don't lean out or pause or whatever your version might be. And it can be micro pauses. I think that's the other piece. Like it can be literally adding in mindfulness. For me, one of the reasons I got into yoga early on is that I would go and I would learn how to breathe and slow down and I would feel so much different afterwards. And I was like, oh, wow, I can actually like see. It's like letting the snow globe settle. And so even that little bit can begin the shift where you can begin to start to listen to yourself and begin to know. And if you don't take the pause to listen, you won't know what's you. And then you're still in that swirl of fog or the snow globe or whatever your local version is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jesse, it's been a pleasure. I've loved chatting with you. I could chat with you for so much longer and ask you so many questions, but in the interest of time, where can people connect with you and find out more about your work and what you're doing?
The easiest way is to go to my website, which is jessiemahoney.com, and it's Jessie with an IE. Um, it's also pauseandpresence.com, so either will get you to the same place. They could listen to the Mindful Healers podcast, and that gives sort of a flavor of how I show up and lots of fun tools and tips. They could join me for yoga. So there's lots of ways. It's funny, was we were talking about this sort of multifaceted, there's lots of ways to come and find me and jump in because I think we're already in different spaces. And the other thing I'll say is I think many people see me as like a yoga teacher, and I will say that's one tiny bit of what I do. And that's really around working with your nervous system so that all the other stuff works. But that it's really important to sort of see the whole picture in your life. And as you're working towards change, um, really being open to lots of different ways to bring things in. And you don't have to stand on your head to do that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
My pleasure. It was fun.